I'm speechless. Discover how I exposed a year-long affair and broke free from a web of lies. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the prospect of another one of Emma's corporate parties. At 38, I'd grown accustomed to the humdrum of everyday life, not the forced cheer of endless networking and fake smiles. Yet there I was, sitting stiffly in a corner of the plush, overly decorated living room of her colleague's office space, clutching a lukewarm glass of wine and trying to blend into the wallpaper. Emma, my 35-year-old wife, was busy schmoozing with her colleagues, laughing at jokes I wasn't privy to, and generally embodying everything I wasn't at that moment. I felt like an unwanted extra in a movie I had no part in. From the moment I stepped in, I sensed the disconnect. There was this palpable undercurrent of corporate enthusiasm. People who thrived on office politics, their conversations sprinkled with acronyms and buzzwords that left me utterly alienated. I'd spent years in a job that prized substance over show, and now I found myself in a world where appearance often trumped authenticity. Emma's coworkers seemed to operate on an unspoken rule. If you weren't part of the inner circle, you were invisible. I tried to latch onto fragments of conversation, nodding along politely, but it quickly became apparent that my presence was more of an afterthought than a welcome addition. I sat there, silently judging my own inability to engage. Every so often, Emma would glance over with a faint smile, perhaps a brief recognition of my discomfort, but it was gone almost immediately as she returned to her group. I was left with the noise of clinking glasses, awkward laughter, and my own swirling thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on a world that wasn't meant for me, a world where the rules were written in a language I could no longer decipher. After what felt like an eternity of polite small talk and forced smiles, I made a decision. I wasn't built for this sort of superficial interaction, and the night was far too young for me to waste on conversations that felt like a series of obligatory pleasantries. Quietly, I excused myself, promising Emma I'd be right back if needed, and began my escape. The corridors of the building were dimly lit and surprisingly quiet compared to the cacophony of the main room. I navigated my way toward the restroom, a decision that I hoped would give me the solitude I craved for a few moments. The journey down the hallway felt almost liberating. Each step away from the party was like peeling off another layer of pretension. I reached the door marked restrooms and pushed it open, expecting the typical sterile ambience. Instead, I was greeted by something entirely unexpected. Amid the usual hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of disinfectant, there was a peculiar sound, a low, rhythmic tapping that didn't belong in a place like this. At first, I assumed it was just a plumbing issue, the kind of mundane background noise that one easily dismisses. But as I stood there, listening intently, the sound grew more insistent. It was as if something or someone was deliberately making those noises. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone been hiding in here? Was there a prank in play? The thought was absurd, yet undeniably intriguing. I felt a stirring of adrenaline, a reminder that even in the most mundane of situations, the unexpected could be lurking just around the corner. For a moment, I hesitated. The sensible part of my brain urged me to ignore it, to return to the safety of my self-imposed exile and pretend nothing was amiss. But curiosity got the better of me. I approached the source of the sound slowly, each step measured and cautious. The noise seemed to be coming from behind a partially closed stall door at the far end of the row. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out to push it open. What I saw defied all logic and expectation. The stall, normally a sanctuary for privacy, appeared to have been transformed into a makeshift sound booth of sorts. There, in a dim corner, was an old speaker connected to what looked like a small, battery-operated device. It was emitting a series of calculated, deliberate sounds that mimicked the noise of footsteps? No, it was more rhythmic than that, almost musical. The precision of it sent a shiver down my spine. Was this an elaborate joke? Or was there something more sinister at play? My initial shock slowly gave way to a cautious fascination. I examined the device, trying to piece together its purpose. The tapping sound was not random. It was a signal, a message in code perhaps, or an artistic expression gone awry in an unanticipated location. My mind began racing through scenarios that bordered on the absurd. A covert message from Emma's colleagues, a hidden experiment in auditory art, or even a prelude to something far more complex that I hadn't yet fathomed. In that moment, the sterile corporate world I had been trying to escape seemed to crumble around me, replaced by the thrill of a mystery waiting to be unraveled. I couldn't help but think that my evening was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would pull me out of my comfort zone and into the very heart of something inexplicably bizarre. I backed away slowly, the device still humming its relentless tune in the background, leaving me with more questions than answers. As I exited the restroom, I carried with me not only a lingering sense of unease, but also a spark of anticipation for what might come next. Tonight, it seemed, wasn't going to be just another awkward party. It was the beginning of something entirely unforeseen, a twist in my routine that I never saw coming. I stepped back into the dimly lit corridor, the party noise a distant murmur now, and couldn't help but smile wryly at the absurdity of it all. Little did I know that this was just the opening act of a night that would redefine every notion I had about the ordinary. I took a few cautious steps back toward the restroom, still reeling from the bizarre discovery of the mysterious device. My mind was a tangled web of questions and half-formed theories when I heard a sound that made my pulse spike. A voice, unmistakably familiar. I froze, straining to catch the words. The voice was coming from one of the stalls, and as the sound became clearer, a chill ran down my spine. "Nick, you really need to stop." The voice trailed off, as if caught between exasperation and resignation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was Emma. My Emma. Her tone edged with a peculiar mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite place. My confusion deepened, and I edged closer, the hum of the speaker still a low backdrop in the room. Before I could fully process the situation, the stall door swung open. Out stepped a man I didn't expect to see in this strange setting. He was tall, with a meticulously tailored jacket that he straightened with an almost theatrical flourish. His eyes scanned the room briefly before settling on Emma, who stood just beyond him. The contrast between the two was striking. The man's appearance was immaculate, every detail deliberate, while Emma looked utterly disheveled. Her hair slightly askew, lipstick smeared as if she had rushed through a storm of emotion, her makeup running like watercolor on a rainy day. For a long, tense moment, time seemed to slow. Emma's eyes locked with mine, and there was no trace of the nervous politeness I had come to expect from her in such social settings. Instead, her gaze was raw and unapologetic. The man, whose presence now added an undeniable layer of complexity to the unfolding drama, simply gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Leo," Emma said, her voice steady yet carrying an edge that made it clear there was no room for further explanation. I recognized that name from the whispered rumors and fragmented conversations that had somehow reached even the fringes of our private life. A name that I had subconsciously tried to bury. Leo, at 41, exuded a confidence and a mystery that was as captivating as it was dangerous. And here he was, emerging from the shadows of a restroom at a party that was supposed to be nothing more than a night of corporate pleasantries. I opened my mouth intending to speak, to ask what the hell was going on. But before I could, Emma's voice cut in, dismissive and unapologetic. "You're exaggerating, Nick," she said coolly, as though my bewilderment were nothing more than an overblown reaction to an ordinary event. Her tone was so brazen that it defied all logic. There was no tremor of fear, no sign of remorse, only an almost casual defiance that left me reeling. The words hung in the air, a declaration that shattered whatever pretense of normality I had clung to. In that moment, I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about Emma, and about our relationship, seemed to crumble, replaced by an avalanche of questions and a gnawing sense of betrayal. I stood there, caught between disbelief and a desperate need for clarity, as the tension in the cramped restroom grew palpable. Leo's eyes flickered toward me, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw a spark of something unreadable. A challenge, perhaps, or even a silent plea for understanding. But then he stepped aside, as if to underline that whatever was happening between Emma and him was none of my business. It was a silent command to stay out of it, a signal that the dynamics of our marriage had shifted irreversibly. My heart pounded in my chest, my thoughts a chaotic storm of memories and suspicions. The hum of the mysterious device still resonated in the background, an eerie reminder that nothing about this evening was as it seemed. I tried to speak again, but the words got caught in my throat as Emma's eyes met mine with an intensity that belied her casual dismissal. "You always make it so dramatic, Nick," she continued, her voice a blend of scorn and disbelief, as if she were lecturing a child who'd misunderstood the gravity of a trivial matter. The air around us seemed to vibrate with the weight of her defiance. I wanted to respond, to challenge her assertion, but every logical thought was drowned out by the raw, visceral emotion coursing through me. I stepped back slowly, as if retreating from a battlefield I hadn't expected to enter. The restroom, once a refuge from the suffocating pretensions of the party, had now become the stage for a confrontation that threatened to unravel everything I held dear. As I backed away, my mind raced, desperate to grasp some semblance of truth amid the layers of deception and half-truths. Outside the restroom, the party's dull chatter and clinking glasses felt like a cruel contrast to the emotional tempest I had just witnessed. I paused in the corridor, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to piece together what I had seen and heard. Emma's words echoed in my mind, "You're exaggerating, Nick," and with each repetition, they felt less like a denial of reality and more like a final dismissal of my feelings. The evening, which had already started as a mundane, awkward affair, had now morphed into something unrecognizable, a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. I realized that I was no longer just an unwilling guest at a corporate party. I had unwittingly become a reluctant participant in a drama that was unfolding far beyond my control. And as the initial shock began to give way to a growing resolve, I knew that the events of this night would ripple through every corner of my life, changing everything I thought I understood about trust, loyalty, and the very nature of our relationship. With Leo and Emma occupying a space that now felt both dangerously close and impossibly distant, I found myself at a crossroads. I could either let this moment pass, retreating into the comfort of ignorance, or confront the situation head-on, no matter how painful or complicated it might be. As I lingered in the corridor, the sounds of the party fading into a background hum, I realized that my next steps would determine not only the course of the night, but the very trajectory of my life. It was clear that the story of tonight was just beginning, and that every twist and turn, every whispered secret, was bound to reveal truths I had long suspected but never dared to fully acknowledge. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind brimming with questions, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready, or perhaps resigned, to face whatever lay ahead, even if it meant shattering the carefully constructed facade of everything I once believed in. The corridor's charged silence quickly gave way to an uproar as I stepped back into the main room, the taste of betrayal and confusion sour on my tongue. I couldn't let it go any longer. I needed answers. I couldn't sit by while Emma and Leo wove a tangled web right before my eyes, especially not in the presence of her colleagues who were now watching the unfolding drama with barely concealed curiosity. Without thinking, I strode toward Emma, who was now trying to mingle with a group of her colleagues, her face a mask of forced cheer. Every step felt weighted, as if I were trudging through a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I reached the small circle where she stood and interrupted the chatter with a loud, shaky demand for explanation. "Emma, what the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice echoing across the room and instantly drowning out the casual conversations. Heads turned, and a hush fell over the group, the festive atmosphere shattered in an instant. I could feel the eyes of her colleagues on me, some filled with pity, others with outright judgment. I was caught in the spotlight, a disruption in their meticulously curated corporate social event. Emma's eyes widened momentarily in surprise, and for a split second, I saw the vulnerability behind her defiant exterior. But that flash vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Nick, you're making a scene," she snapped, her tone dripping with irritation. Her voice was steady, almost too calm given the explosive situation we'd found ourselves in. "This is a corporate event, not a personal therapy session. Go home and get some sleep," she added dismissively, as if my concerns were nothing more than an overblown reaction to a minor misunderstanding. I stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding in indignation. The words stung, not just because they were a public dismissal of my pain and confusion, but because they came from the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew. The look on her face was one of cold calculation, as if my very presence and my emotions were an inconvenience that she was more than willing to brush aside in order to maintain her image among her peers. My mind raced, struggling to bridge the gulf between the Emma I thought I recognized and the one standing before me now. I felt a tumult of emotions, a mix of anger, betrayal, and deep hurt that cut through me like a jagged shard of glass. I wasn't prepared for this public confrontation. I had never imagined that the cracks in our marriage would splinter so violently in the glare of office lights and expectant eyes. "I deserve an explanation," I insisted, my voice raw with frustration. "I deserve to know why you're with him." The question, simple yet loaded, hung in the air like a challenge to the carefully constructed veneer of her professional life. I could see a ripple of discomfort in the faces of her colleagues, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease as they witnessed a private matter unfold in such a public setting. Emma's response was swift, a shield of cold indifference. "Nick, stop," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're just making things worse. This isn't the time or place." She brushed her hand dismissively as if swatting away an annoying insect, her eyes flickering briefly to the door as if to signal that I should leave, remove my complications from her perfect party. But I couldn't. I needed to know the truth, even if it shattered everything I'd ever believed about us. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on," I replied, my voice low but unwavering, each word a plea for honesty amid the chaos. The room, now thick with tension, seemed to hold its collective breath. I could see my own reflection in the eyes of her colleagues. Someone pushed to the brink, fighting against the tide of humiliation. Emma's gaze hardened, and for a moment, I thought I might see the real her, the one who had once been compassionate and understanding. But that moment was fleeting. "Nick," she said, her voice a blend of condescension and finality, "if you can't control yourself, then maybe you should just go home and get some sleep. This isn't worth it." With that, she turned away, deliberately choosing to step back into the crowd, her back an impenetrable barrier between us. Her dismissal stung more than any harsh words could. I felt as if I were standing alone in the center of a storm, abandoned by the one person I trusted with my heart. The betrayal was raw and unfiltered, and as I looked around, I could see whispers and knowing glances being exchanged among her colleagues. In that moment, I wasn't just fighting for answers. I was fighting for the remnants of my dignity, my pride, and the life I thought I had shared with Emma. I took a shaky breath, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on me. The room had transformed into a stage, and I was the unwilling performer in a tragedy I hadn't auditioned for. The embarrassment, the anger, and the heartbreak all coalesced into a bitter cocktail that left me reeling. As I stood there, the echoes of my demands and her curt replies filled the room. I realized that this public spectacle had become a turning point, a moment that would forever alter the contours of our lives. The faces around me blurred into an indistinct mass of judgment and pity, and I couldn't help but wonder how many of them had ever truly witnessed the raw vulnerability of a love unraveling in real time. I looked at Emma one last time, her eyes now devoid of the spark I once cherished. The person she was before this night, the partner I believed in, seemed to have dissolved into the persona she now presented to the world. And in that realization, I understood that nothing would ever be the same again. With a heavy heart and an aching sense of loss, I turned away, my departure as silent as the betrayal that had just unfolded. I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the echoes of a once familiar life, determined yet heartbroken, ready, or perhaps forced, to face the consequences of a love that had shattered in the glaring light of reality. I hesitated at the threshold of the party once more, the bitter taste of public humiliation still fresh on my tongue. Determined to get some answers, I forced myself back into the chaos of the room, where laughter and clinking glasses tried desperately to mask the tension simmering beneath the surface. My eyes immediately scanned the room until they landed on Leo, who was standing confidently at the bar as if he were the host of this so-called event. His presence was as deliberate as it was unnerving. His posture relaxed, exuding a self-assurance that only deepened my frustration. I made my way over, each step fueled by a mix of indignation and a desperate need to understand. When I reached him, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Leo," I said, my voice tight, "I need an explanation. What the hell is going on here?" I expected him to falter, to be caught off guard by my demand. But instead, he only smiled, as if my questions were part of a well-rehearsed routine. "Well, Nick," he replied, his tone smooth and infuriatingly calm, "I think you're reading too much into things." His eyes, however, glinted with a mix of amusement and something else, like he knew a secret I wasn't privy to. He leaned casually against the bar, swirling his drink as if it were a magic potion that could dissolve the tension between us. Every word he uttered only deepened the mystery and fanned the flames of my anger. Before I could press him further, Emma appeared, her expression hard and resolute. In a swift motion that left no room for negotiation, she grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the bar, out of the suffocating crowd and into the cool night air. The sudden shift from the bright, glaring lights of the party to the relative intimacy of the corridor outside was jarring, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to process what was happening. "Nick, we need to talk now," she said, her tone leaving no space for argument. As soon as we were a few steps away from the throng of curious onlookers, her grip tightened, and her eyes searched mine for a moment, as if trying to decide whether I was ready to face the truth. I wanted to demand more, to insist that Leo explain himself, but Emma's stern look told me that wouldn't be the route she was willing to take tonight. We found a quiet corner in a dimly lit hallway just outside the main room. The cool night air mixed with the warmth of our combined tension, and I could almost hear the echoes of every unsaid word between us. Emma's features were softened by the ambient light, but the resolve in her eyes was unmistakable. "Nick, you have to understand," she began, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of secrets too long kept. "Things aren't as simple as you think." I clenched my jaw, my mind racing to piece together the fragments of a story that suddenly seemed more twisted than I'd ever imagined. "Then explain it to me, Emma," I demanded, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. "Explain why you're here with him, why you've been acting like nothing's wrong even though everything is falling apart." She sighed, a long weary sound that spoke of endless nights spent wrestling with guilt and confusion. "Leo and I, what happened between us isn't something I can just unravel for you in a few sentences," she said. "There are things about my past, things about us, that I never told you because I thought I could keep them buried. But tonight it all came crashing down." Her words sent a chill through me, and I couldn't help but press further. "What past? What secrets have you been keeping?" I demanded, my voice cracking with a mixture of fury and hurt. Emma hesitated, her eyes darting away as if the truth might escape her if she looked too directly at it. Finally, with a resigned exhale, she continued, "Leo and I, we had a connection long before you and I got married. It was a time in my life when I was lost, and he was there, offering me something I thought I needed." Her confession felt like a punch to the gut, every syllable reverberating with betrayal. I thought I could shut that part of my life off, bury it beneath the responsibilities and expectations of our marriage. But then things got complicated, and I tried to pretend it never happened. I was wrong, Nick. I was so wrong. I could hardly process the avalanche of emotions crashing over me. The revelation of a past connection between Emma and Leo was one thing, but the way she admitted it, as if it were a burdensome truth rather than a calculated betrayal, left me reeling. "So all those signs, the secretive glances, the hushed conversations?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, laden with the weight of disillusionment. Emma's eyes glistened, and she reached out to touch my arm in a gesture that felt both tender and desperate. "I never meant to hurt you," she said softly. "I was trying to protect you in a way. I thought I could manage everything, keep my past separate from our present." But I see now that I was only fooling myself. Her admission, rather than comforting me, only served to deepen the labyrinth of confusion. There was a vulnerability in her tone that I hadn't seen before, a hint that the life she had built was riddled with compromises and choices made in moments of weakness. Yet even as I listened, my mind churned with questions. Had Leo simply been a remnant of a chapter long closed, or was he something more? A deliberate intrusion into the life we once knew? Before I could formulate another question, a sudden noise from inside the party jarred us both. The sound of raised voices, punctuated by stifled laughter and murmurs of disbelief, echoed down the hallway. For a split second, I wondered if Leo had decided to reinsert himself into the conversation, or if someone else had noticed our clandestine exchange. Emma's eyes hardened as she stepped back from me. "We can't stay here," she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder. "Not tonight. There's too much at stake." Her words carried a sense of finality, as if this conversation was merely the calm before an inevitable storm that would reshape everything. I wanted to protest, to demand that we confront the entire mess head-on. But deep down I sensed that this was only the beginning of a much larger unraveling. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice a mix of resignation and curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, then met my gaze with a resolve I hadn't seen in her before. "Home," she replied simply. "We need to go home and figure this out away from all these prying eyes." The idea of retreating to the familiar confines of our shared life, now so tainted by secrets and half-truths, was almost too painful to consider. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized that escaping the prying judgment of her colleagues and the relentless presence of Leo was the only way we could possibly begin to untangle this mess. With a heavy heart and the weight of 1,000 unspoken words between us, I followed her back into the depths of the party. Every step felt like a step into the unknown, into a future where nothing was as it once seemed, and where every truth was bound to be questioned again. The confrontation with Leo had only added another layer to the intricate tapestry of lies, love, and betrayal that now defined our lives, leaving me to wonder if any semblance of normalcy could ever be restored. Back inside, the tension between us seemed to reach a fever pitch as we made our way to the quiet solitude of our car. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on me, and I could feel every unspoken word thrumming in the space between us. Emma's eyes darted away from mine as if she were trying to escape the inevitable confrontation, and I could sense that she was gathering her thoughts that would soon unravel the carefully constructed web of excuses she had so long maintained. "It's not what you think," she began abruptly, her tone attempting nonchalance even as her trembling hands betrayed her inner turmoil. I scoffed inwardly at the casual dismissal, feeling the sting of betrayal anew. It was as if she expected me to simply nod and accept a flimsy explanation, a verbal band-aid over a wound that was far too deep to ignore. I pressed her, needing to hear more. "Then what is it, Emma? Because right now, it looks like you're saying everything's fine, while I'm the one left here to pick up the shattered pieces." My voice cracked with a mix of anger and hurt, and for a moment, the space between us felt too vast, filled with the echoes of promises broken and secrets laid bare. Emma's eyes flashed with an unexpected counterattack. "You never paid attention, Nick," she shot back, the words slicing through the air with a cold precision that left no room for defense. "You're so wrapped up in your own world, your routines, your expectations, that you failed to notice what was happening right in front of you." Her words hit me like a punch, not only because they were an accusation but because they forced me to confront my own shortcomings, however unintended they might have been. I felt my anger falter for a moment, replaced by a pit of regret. Had I really been so oblivious? But then, as if sensing my vulnerability, Emma took a deep breath and her voice lowered, the bravado melting away into a confession laden with years of pent-up emotion. "I cheated because I felt invisible, Nick," she admitted, each word heavy with the weight of regret and despair. "I felt like I was screaming into a void, like my presence didn't matter, and you were always somewhere else." Her admission hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, as if we were both suspended in a reality that was suddenly too honest to bear. The vulnerability in her tone was unmistakable, a stark contrast to the defensive mask she had worn all evening. In that moment, I saw not just the woman who had betrayed our vows, but someone who had been starving for acknowledgement, for a spark of recognition in a life that had grown dull and monotonous. I struggled to process her words. Every accusation, every confession, sent ripples through my soul. Invisible, I repeated slowly, the word reverberating in my mind as I tried to make sense of it. The irony of her claim wasn't lost on me. Here I was, racked with jealousy and betrayal, only to hear that my absence, my preoccupation, had driven her to seek validation elsewhere. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The engine of our car rumbled quietly as we sat in the dim light of a street lamp, our faces partially hidden in shadow. I searched her eyes for any sign of remorse, any indication that she regretted the pain she had inflicted, but all I saw was a tangle of regret and resignation. "Nick, I'm sorry," she finally whispered, the words barely audible over the hum of the city night. "I tried to tell you in my own way. I thought if I could just feel seen, even for a moment, I wouldn't feel so alone." The raw admission tore at me, and despite everything, a part of me ached for the woman who had once been so full of life and light. But the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I felt a mix of sorrow and anger, and I knew that even as I wanted to understand, I wasn't ready to forgive. "I can't believe you'd do this," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I tried to be there for you, Emma. I thought we were in this together." My words were more a cry than a reprimand, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap that had widened between us over the years. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked away, the admission of feeling invisible laid bare between us. "I know," she said softly, almost as if lamenting the inevitability of our drifting apart. "I never meant to hurt you. I felt so lost, Nick. And in that emptiness, I made a mistake." The confession, though sincere, did little to ease the ache in my chest. Every excuse, every admission only underscored the fracture in our marriage. The spark of connection that had once defined us now lay in ruins, scattered by the careless winds of neglect and unmet needs. For what felt like an eternity, we sat there in the darkness, each lost in our own tumultuous thoughts. The world outside continued to move, a relentless reminder that life goes on, indifferent to the personal tragedies that sometimes shatter it. And while part of me wanted to scream, to demand that we fix everything immediately, another part understood that some wounds were too deep for quick healing. Emma's voice broke the silence again, tentative yet resolute. "I know this isn't easy, Nick, and I know I can't change what I did, but I need you to understand that I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I was drowning in a sea of loneliness." Her words were raw and unpolished, a far cry from the polished professionalism she often projected at work. I closed my eyes, trying to reconcile the woman before me with the partner I had thought I knew. The pain of her betrayal intermingled with the pain of my own shortcomings, and in that moment, I realized that the truth was far more complicated than either of us could have anticipated. The night had stripped away our pretenses, leaving us bare and vulnerable. Two people hurt by the weight of their own expectations. As the silence returned, heavy and filled with unspoken regrets, I knew that nothing could simply revert to how it had been. The admission of feeling invisible was not just an excuse. It was a window into a deeper, unaddressed pain that had festered between us for far too long. And now, standing at this crossroads, I was forced to confront the reality that perhaps we had both been missing the one thing we needed most: each other. I couldn't accept half-truths and convenient excuses any longer. As we drove home in the oppressive silence of our fractured relationship, my mind raced. Emma's words, the confession of feeling invisible, seemed more like a shield than a revelation. Something wasn't adding up. Once home, while Emma dozed off in the living room with her head resting on a pillow, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Determined to find the whole truth, I retrieved her phone from her purse, my hands trembling as I scrolled through her call log. What I found made my blood run cold. A series of unfamiliar numbers, each appearing with a frequency that suggested a secret life far beyond our troubled marriage. Late into the night, I sat at the kitchen table, the glow of my laptop the only source of light, and began piecing together the puzzle. The numbers were all over the place. Some repeated, others marked with unusual times of day. I hesitated, then dialed one of the numbers, my heart pounding in my ears. A stranger answered, a man with a tired voice who, after a few hesitant words, revealed that he too had been entangled with Emma. He didn't mince words. He told me how Emma had charmed him, how she had woven her way into his life with a mixture of allure and calculated indifference. The revelation hit me like a blow. I had always known something was off, but this confirmed it. Emma had been juggling more than just one secret liaison. The next day, unable to contain my need for answers, I arranged to meet one of her other lovers. I found myself in a dimly lit cafe at the edge of town, my stomach churning with dread and anticipation. There, waiting at a corner table, was Austin, 36 years old, his demeanor a mix of resignation and defiance. As we exchanged curt greetings, he didn't waste any time getting to the point. According to Austin, the affair had been going on for over a year. He explained that Emma had ended the relationship herself, not because she'd lost interest, but because she was calculating something far more sinister than mere flirtation. Austin's words spilled out in a quiet, matter-of-fact tone as he recounted his experience with Emma. He said she wasn't looking for attention, as many might assume. She was after control. She played both of us, Nick, Austin confided, his eyes dark with memories of manipulation. It wasn't about a lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. Emma knew exactly what she was doing, using us to feel powerful, to fill a void that she created on purpose. His words stung with a mix of bitterness and sorrow, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. The woman I'd loved, the person who had confessed to feeling invisible, had instead been orchestrating her own web of deceit. Listening to Austin, the cruel truth unfolded in my mind. Everything, every excuse, every half-hearted apology, seemed like a calculated move in a game she was determined to win. She had engineered her affairs with a precision that left me reeling. It wasn't about neglect or a lack of attention, as she had claimed. It was about power, a need to control and dominate a narrative that left her feeling omnipotent in her own life. I left the cafe in a daze, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of loss. The discovery of Emma's double life wasn't just a betrayal. It was a revelation of her true nature, one that I had been blind to for far too long. The affair had lasted over a year, and in that time, she had played both men like pieces on a chessboard, her moves calculated and cold. The more I learned, the more I realized that the woman I thought I knew was a master of manipulation, someone who thrived on control rather than genuine connection. That night, as I sat alone in the darkened living room with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and my own thoughts for company, the pieces of the puzzle finally began to form a complete picture. A picture of a relationship that had been built on lies, manipulation, and an insatiable desire for power. Emma's confession of feeling invisible was a carefully chosen lie, a diversion to mask the truth of her calculated behavior. And as the cruel reality set in, I understood that my life was now irreversibly altered. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a deep-seated flaw in the very foundation of what I believed we had built together. In that moment, I resolved that I needed to confront the full extent of the deception. The next steps would be painful and uncertain, but I knew that facing the truth head-on, however brutal it might be, was the only way to reclaim some semblance of dignity and control over my own life. The cruel truth had been unveiled, and there was no turning back from this dark and unyielding reality. I stepped back into our house, my mind a turbulent mix of betrayal and a strangely exhilarating sense of resolve. The silence that greeted me was oppressive, every shadow in the hallway whispering memories of a life we had built together over 12 long years. I knew there was no turning back now, no matter what Emma might say. I had come home, determined to face the culmination of everything I had uncovered, and now the full confrontation was inevitable. In the living room, I found her standing by the window, her back turned, as if she had been expecting my return. The air was heavy with unsaid words. I could feel the weight of each secret, every carefully constructed lie, pressing down on my chest. Emma turned slowly, her eyes reflecting a strange mix of resignation and defiance. "I suppose you already know everything," she said softly, her voice trembling with a vulnerability that I no longer cared to save. There was no anger in her tone, just a stark admission of a truth she had carried for far too long.
"I'm unhappy, Nick."
I never was happy, and I thought, maybe if I could feel something different, I might finally feel alive. Her confession, delivered without remorse, sliced through me like a blade. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was her utter lack of regret. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "So this is it?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "You admit you're unhappy and that you cheated, and yet you don't regret it?" The question hung in the air, an accusation and a plea for clarity all at once. Emma met my gaze steadily. "I don't regret it, Nick," she said, her voice firm now, as if embracing the choices that had led us here. "I made those decisions because I needed something more, something I felt I was missing in our marriage. I tried to be honest with myself about it long before you ever knew." Her eyes softened for a moment, and she reached out as if to bridge the chasm between us. "I still love you, Nick. I never stopped. But I can't pretend anymore that everything was okay." For a fleeting second, I almost believed her. I almost allowed myself to hope that maybe we could find a way back from this, a way to repair the broken fragments of a shared past. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw not the woman I had loved all these years, but someone who had chosen her own liberation over the confines of our crumbling life together. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't keep living in a house full of secrets and shattered promises." Every word resonated with the finality of a decision that had been months in the making, even if the moment of reckoning was only now arriving. Without another word, I turned and began packing a few essential belongings into a duffel bag. I moved mechanically, each item a token of a shared history that I was finally ready to leave behind. Emma moved quickly toward me, her eyes wide with panic. "Nick, please don't go. We can work this out. I still love you. We can fix this," she pleaded, her voice rising in desperation as she reached out to grab my arm. But I wouldn't believe her anymore. Every plea, every promise was just another echo of the lies that had defined the past year. I felt a strange calm as I zipped up the bag. For the first time in 12 years, I felt a sense of freedom. A freedom that came not from happiness, but from the release of a burden I had carried far too long. "Emma, I'm sorry, but I have to leave," I said, my voice breaking slightly with the weight of the moment. "I can't live like this. I can't keep holding on to something that isn't real." I took one last look around the room, a room filled with memories of love, laughter, and ultimately, betrayal, and then stepped out the door without turning back. As I walked away from our home, the cool night air greeted me like a promise of new beginnings. I could still hear Emma's voice calling out behind me, each word soaked with regret and longing. "Nick, please." But the sound faded into the darkness, drowned out by the steady rhythm of my own footsteps. In that moment, as the distance between us grew with every step, I realized something profound. For the first time in all these years, I felt truly free. The chains of a loveless, suffocating marriage were finally broken, and though the path ahead was uncertain and scarred by loss, it was mine to walk. I stepped forward into the night, each stride a declaration that I was reclaiming my life, my future, and leaving behind the cruel truths that had once held me captive.